Hey everybody, my name is Chris. Welcome to the Ancient Oak, where we are discussing the journey from Christianity into Wicca, or British traditional witchcraft. I'd like to give a quick upfront that this video might be a little all over the place because I'm working with a lot of different disjointed ideas, but they all kind of revolve around the idea of what is the difference between really what happens in the Catholic and Orthodox churches in terms of liturgical work or ritual work, and what happens in the pagan and Wiccan practices. Now, this video I'd like to speak more directly to the former Catholic or Eastern Orthodox people, or maybe those who still are. So if you haven't watched any of my previous videos, that's my background, is I was in the traditional Latin Mass Roman Catholic style of liturgics for a number of years, and then ended up converting into Eastern Orthodoxy, and then spent a year in a Russian Orthodox monastery as a novitiate, studying to be a monk. So my background is obviously one of a very, what you would call, high church, with a high emphasis on the liturgical life of the church. And that's really where I'd like to make the two connections between paganism, Wicca in particular, and traditional Christianity. What I had to do when I was coming out of Orthodoxy, because that was the last Christian denomination you could say I was in before really fully jumping into opening up to paganism and then eventually Wicca, was I had to reframe what I thought was appropriate liturgical practices. So I hope you follow me here on this idea. So as for me, and maybe for some of you out there, when you're in the Orthodox or Catholic Church, the practices that you're doing seem incredibly normal. In the Orthodox Church, as I've mentioned in previous videos, we're doing what by all accounts from an outside perspective looks like ritual magic. And that's where I'd really like anyone who's out there, maybe coming out of one of these traditions into paganism, to really consider, is to ask yourself that question. This is a question I would ask yourself, is what wasn't magic about what you were doing in the Orthodox Church or in the Catholic Church? Let's take, for example, the idea of ritual cleansing. So in any liturgical practice, especially in the Orthodox Church, the Catholics have sort of lost the use of incense outside of the traditional Latin Mass. But, speaking from a high liturgical perspective, like the Orthodox Church or the traditional Latin Mass in the Catholic Church, incense is the starting point for any liturgy. The first thing you do is ritually cleanse the space with incense. Now, this is also what ancient Israelites did in the temple. If you read the early books of the Old Testament where ritual sacrifices described, incense and the burning of incense and offering incense to God is always sort of a starting point for any part of a ritual. And I think any cursory glance across a comparative religion landscape will show you that the use of ritual, the ritual use of incense for the purposes of purification is not unique to Christianity. It is not unique to paganism. It is nearly a universal practice across all religions, across time and across geography. And so, if you're coming out of one of these traditions and you kind of miss that sense of having the incense, just recognize that this is something you don't have to lose. This is part and parcel of pagan practice and Wiccan practice. The blessing of the incense and the blessing of the charcoal and using it to ritually cleanse and protect your circle. That is Wiccan circle casting 101. And if you look at the practices in the Orthodox Church, especially in the Catholic Church, the first thing they do is, upon the start of the liturgy, they process with incense and cleanse the whole space. Ask yourself, what's different? What are they doing different? Why does the person who is an Orthodox priest have more magical powers than you to cleanse a space? Or Why is this reserved for church? And it's not, of course. I mean, if you were anything like me, you used incense at home. Now, if you've left the church and you're entering into paganism or Wicca, you're doing the same thing. You're ritually cleansing your home with incense. And I would just advise that if anyone's struggling with that, just kind of realize that in the Wiccan practices, especially the traditional Wiccan practices, you're going to find a lot of similarities and a lot of things that are probably comforting, that are going to seem very familiar, and you'll be right at home with the way that they practice their liturgy. So another practice that I've found perfectly at home in the Wiccan practices is the blessing of particular items. Now, I think in a Catholic and an Orthodox perspective, you would use the word sacramentals, not as sacrament, such as the Eucharist or baptism, but we had the idea of sacramentals, things that, physical items like a rosary or a medal or maybe even a garment or something that you could take to a priest to be blessed, and it would become a sacramental, i.e. it would have some sort of imprint on it of the sacred, and you could use that in your personal devotional practices. Now, again, I'm not trying to beat a dead horse here or say the same thing over and over, but if you're anything hard-headed like me, maybe it kind of takes a little beaten into the head. But again, ask yourself, how is this not ritual magic? How is the blessing of items by a priest using a particular set of words out of a book, how is that not any different than a Wiccan putting crystals or magical items on their windowsill during a full moon to be blessed and to be charged? One thing is quite factually no different than the other. I've said this before, all that matters is what you think about what is going on there. So for anyone, again, maybe in that bubble of Catholicism or Orthodoxy who is struggling looking at Wiccan practices and saying, I just don't know if that seems right or seems normal, just really ask yourself, what's the difference? What can you say more about a priest blessing a rosary than me, myself, as a personal practitioner, blessing the items I use, whether it's my own stones and minerals I use in my practices, or blessing candles with oil, which is something we do in the Wiccan practice. Just like in the Catholic and Orthodox Church, there's oil, there's holy oil. Maybe we wouldn't use the words holy oil, but there's blessed oil that's used for a variety of purposes, for healing, for blessing items, for ritual cleansing. Does this sound familiar? Yes, it sounds exactly like Roman Catholicism and Eastern Orthodoxy. And the case could be made that there's a lot of syncretism, religious syncretism going on, and that's definitely true. I don't think anyone would say that it's not true. No one's saying that these Wiccan practices are 100% unique, but what they do come from is the rich history of long religious tradition, pre-Christian, through the Christian era, into today. Christians did not develop the idea of blessing items, and they're not going to be the last people to bless items. So here's where it does get maybe a little tricky for the people coming out of the Catholic and Orthodox churches. What you're definitely probably thinking to yourself is, well, the difference between me blessing a tool I would use in ritual magic and a priest blessing a medal or an icon is that priest has apostolic succession going back to the church, and thus he is acting, as the Catholic Church would say, in persona Christi, in the person of Christ. But understand that if you're coming out of that tradition and you're already beginning to have fractures in your faith about whether that's true or not, just I advise you to take the little leap of faith and open up your mind to say, what's the difference? I feel like that's going to be the title of this video. What's the difference? Because there's no more. You can't put a blessed rosary under a microscope or a blessed athame under a microscope and find any difference. It's purely a matter of faith. And so, if you're already coming out of the tradition, I just say, open up your heart and let your mind see what else is out there, and try to break out of that box that you've been in for so long. And maybe I'm just talking to myself right now, but I think that could speak to a lot of other people. So another one to think about is the idea of clairvoyant elders. So I know in the Orthodox Church maybe it was a little bit more stressed, but that's not to say that they don't exist in the Catholic Church. But in the Orthodox Church, it was quite normal to venerate many saints from the past who we would have said were clairvoyant, who could tell the future. Mount Athos in Greece is one of the most respected places of Orthodox monasticism in the world, and many modern saints, even like Saint Paisios, are known for fortune telling, for outright fortune telling. People would travel to the mountain to ask him questions about their future. And as an Orthodox Christian, I would have never put one and one together and said, yeah, this is fortune telling. I would have said, oh, he's working through the Holy Spirit to provide guidance to the people. As a Catholic or Orthodox person, I'm telling you, you're already there. You're already willing to accept the idea of divination. What we would call that outside of the church is the idea of divination, is using different tools to take a look, though through a foggy mirror, but trying to look into the future as best we can to help make decisions, to help guide our actions, or maybe just to get a little clarity on what's going on in our life. But if I go to a friend I know who reads runes or reads tarot, and I'm asking him to talk to the spirits and see what guidance I can get, what's the difference between that and talking to a monk on a mountain somewhere who people are saying is clairvoyant? There are gurus in India who have huge followings, who have pretty substantial claims to clairvoyance. So, once more, what's the difference? What's the difference between these two? What we are doing, whether you're an Orthodox Christian talking to a monk who you think is clairvoyant, or going to a tarot reader, you are practicing divination. And I do like going to tarot readers, but I also can read my own cards, and I use dice for divination, and sometimes just meditation. I'd rather put that into my own hands than trust some monk on a mountain or some guru. Now, there's nothing wrong with doing that. It's just, for me, a lot of what the journey from orthodoxy into paganism has about reclaiming my own power as a person to enact these changes. I don't believe I need to have an intermediary through the church to receive grace. You might be able to get technical with me about the fact that the church doesn't believe that I have to go through priests to get God's grace, but in all practical matters, we all know that it's true that the priesthood holds the keys to accessing God's direct, sacraments through that priesthood. And this experience and journey for me has been about reclaiming that for myself and finding the priesthood essentially within myself, that I am the shaper of my own world to the extent that I can. A lot of stuff is still outside of everybody's control, but to the extent that we can shape our lives through ritual magic or spell work and put our intentions into the universe, I've been very happy putting myself back in the driver's seat. But now I'm going to bring up something that usually can tend to divide a room, which is the idea of spell work or casting spells. Now, we all have, of course, seen probably far too much pop culture that when someone uses the word casting a spell or doing spell work, immediately images of Harry Potter or other shows maybe from the mid-90s on the WB pop into your head. And I think it's unfortunate that it's kind of attached to that, but I don't really have any other word to use, so we're just going to roll with it. But essentially what doing spell work is I'm going to make the case that it's absolutely no different than prayer, especially prayer in the Catholic and Orthodox perspective. Now, the Protestants, they don't really use physical items in their prayer life or in their personal practices, but the Catholics and the Orthodox do. We'd have icons or prayer robes or holy water or incense to burn. So there's so many physical things that are used in the course of even a personal practice at home that I still use currently as a Wiccan. So I would pose this question to somebody, especially the Orthodox and the Catholics. Say you have an icon of the Virgin Mary at an altar in your house. You go up and light some incense. You burn a candle. You say a rosary. You do very specific things, and maybe you do them over and over. And you are doing that hoping to cause an effect. You are doing that to affect some change in your life, or maybe some change in another person's life. And that is exactly what doing spell work in Wicca is. So instead of maybe lighting a candle in front of the Virgin Mary, maybe I'm going to do a variety of different practices that are pretty common in Wiccan circles, like maybe a spell jar, where you take a glass jar and add different, you could say, ingredients to the jar, maybe different herbs, different stones, maybe write a note in that jar for what you're hoping to accomplish, set it on your altar, burn candles, bless the jar with some incense, and send that energy out into the universe. Now, that if that isn't a prayer, I don't know what is. I don't know the difference between that and what I used to do, other than maybe the focus of where I'm directing that. And the interesting thing is there has been absolutely no difference in the effectiveness of my prayers and or spell work that I'm doing. I don't want to say it's 50-50, but I think it's it's sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes a prayer is answered and sometimes it isn't. Sometimes you do some spell work and you don't get the change you're hoping, so you retool it and maybe do it a little different next time. But in essence, it's a prayer. And again, I would just challenge anybody maybe who's transitioning from the church into Wicca to just understand that when you hear the word spells or casting spells, maybe think about it just like conducting prayer or practicing a personal practice like praying a rosary. It's something that's deeply personal to you that you're doing to affect some change in your life. Well, I hope you've liked the video. I know it's been a little bit all over the place, but like I said, I just had a bunch of sort of disconnected ideas in my head that were coming together into one sort of conglomeration, which is advice for people who are leaving the Catholic or Orthodox Church, which is if you're having trouble looking at the practices of pagans or Wiccans, just really think about the different things you have done throughout your time as a Christian, and just try to reframe it and understand what it is, And I can't stress this enough. Just start doing things. Sometimes just physically building a small altar, anything, just lighting a candle is going to get you going on this path. And if you're just sitting around thinking about it and reading books about it, which is fine, I'm not saying it's not, but if you're not practicing it and you're not doing it, then you're never going to learn, and you're never going to make the mistakes, and you're never going to see what works or what vibes with you. So again, if you're coming from those backgrounds and you're looking into Wicca, I can't stress enough. Just start practicing it. And I'm here to tell you, Satan isn't going to jump out of the wall and drag you down to hell. I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but it's just not happening. And which brings me to another point. Anyone who's leaving Christianity and starting to maybe have an affinity towards Wicca, I just want to let you know right now, Satan does not factor in to Wicca. I'm not saying that there's not Wiccans out there who look at him as an angel in part of a pantheon or a way of doing ritual magic, but it's not the norm, and also it doesn't fall into the category because it's a Christian concept and doesn't have anything to do with pagan practices that were existing long before Christianity was around. So when you see a pentagram and you think, oh, that's satanic, I really challenge you to do a little research and start understanding the history of these symbols and sacred geometry and why these things are used and have been used for millennia. I think we'll leave it at that for today. Thank you for watching the video. If you have not yet, please subscribe, and if you know anyone else who's going through a journey like this, I really encourage you to share these videos with them. And in doing that, hopefully I can start a wider conversation about what it is to make this journey. Thank you everybody for watching, and I will see you at the next video.